U društvu koje tone u mrak, čemu smo skloniji? Borbi, bijegu ili poricanju?
I think the paradox is that we are inclined to deny. We deny reality. We like to believe that that which has been is always going to continue to be. And so we ignore the truth that's before our eyes. And when we wake up, it's too late.
Dobrodošli u Razgovor s razlogom. Kako bi izgledalo europsko društvo kada bi skliznulo u totalitarizam, kada bi tajna policija odvodila nepoćudne u nepoznato, a svaki se građanin morao zapitati je li vrijeme za bijeg? Tu noćnu moru na primjeru Irske oslikava roman Prorokova pjesma. Njegov je autor jedan od najvažnijih suvremenih irskih pisaca, dobitnik prestižne nagrade Booker za 2023. godinu, naš gost s razlogom, Lynch. Izuzetno mi je zadovoljstvo da ste s nama i hvala vam na tome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Gospodine Lynch, kažete kako ništa brže ne ubija knjigu nego pisac s porukom. Zašto to mislite?
I mean, this is an age-old discussion about art. Should art message the reader? Should art have an agenda? I think that we've had, particularly in the Anglophone world, at least 10 years of very political fiction. And the problem with that for me as a writer is that when you're being decidedly political, well, you're usually working with an agenda and you usually know the answer to your problems. You have a grievance and you are looking to solve the problem. There's the solution. But art, serious art, has always worked with a different way of looking. I think that this goes back to something the great poet Keats called negative capability. The idea that we write into the unknown. We write into what we don't understand, but without seeking for certainty. We write seeking to express the questions. Because life is so fundamentally complex, we don't know. And what art has to do is truly reflect that back to us, reflect the complexity through questions. And so that in a way is not grievance, but is grief, because grief is the human condition. Grief is the fact that we don't know and we don't understand, and we move through life blind to the fates, so to speak. We move through life and everything we have will be lost. Life is impermanence. And so life is, you know, part of this problem of grief is suffering. It's the fact that life is full of misfortune. It's full of, but it's also full of wonder, but we lose the wonder too. And so to me, these are the problems. And if you take a book like Prophet Song, which people say, oh, it's a political novel. I say, no, 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 no. It's a metaphysical novel. It's fundamentally about the eternal problems of being a human being in a problematic world.
Mnogi su kritičari rekli da je Prorokova pjesma zapravo roman duha vremena, a vi kažete upravo to da on nije politički roman i sad kad uđemo malo u neke pojedinosti mi doista ne znamo o kojoj vi to ideologiji pišete, događa li se radnja sad u nekoj paralelnoj stvarnosti ili u bliskoj budućnosti. Kako biste vi onda predstavili Prorokovu pjesmu?
I would say the novel takes place in an Ireland that feels recognizable to me. It's set in a Dublin that I would know. It's set in supermarkets and streets that I would feel to be places that are here now. I mean, some people think the novel is set in the future, a near future, and you could also say that it's set in a parallel present. The book doesn't say, I'm not sure that I even know, because it's not important. It's set in a symbolic universe. It's a story. And the story is being used by me to explore a set of questions about the problems of reality, the problems of Eilish Stack, trying to know a world that she's always known, and then suddenly it becomes unknowable. When you're in a post-truth space, the problem of reality becomes very real. How are you supposed to understand what's happening when the society you've been living in, a liberal democracy, begins to unravel? When you're so caught up in your own life. You're dealing with 4 children, you're dealing with a husband who has been arrested and detained, you're dealing with an elderly father who needs care, you're dealing with a career. That's a lot of complexity. How are you supposed to, at the same time, keep an eye on what we might call the fates, or at least my own modern interpretation of that, the complexity of collapse, the complexity of political events that are happening in the background, the sense that all of us believe, well, things are going to be okay, that common sense is going to prevail, that they won't allow this to happen. Because you're in your house, you're in your kitchen, you're in your sitting room at home, you're dealing with family life. Is there enough milk in the fridge? This is how we live. We don't live our lives at the center of political action. We live our lives as sovereign individuals caught up in our individuality. And we like to believe that the structure of civilization that we've had, that for however long we've had it, that is going to hold. And so when it starts to come undone, we deny it. We don't want to believe it's true. And maybe we can't believe it's true, because then the questions that unfold, that come out of that, are so complex. We're not equipped to deal with it, but that's part of what this novel does.
Koliko u takvim situacijama, kad se taj naš cijeli svijet raspada, smo mi zapravo, kao što ste rekli, smo skloni poricanju, koliko pridajemo u tim nenormalnim vremenima važnost normalnim stvarima i je li u pravu sestra vaše glavne junakinje Eliš, koja kaže da je zapravo povijest tiha kronika onih koji nisu mogli otići?
The novel proves that statement is in many ways wrong. It's a fascinating statement. History is a record of all those who did not leave. But the question is well, how do you leave? Elish Stack is, for me, a completely modern individual. She has all these layers of individuality. She is a mother, as I said, an executive. She's been living in a place all her life. The book shows that to leave means you have to lose all these identities, because leaving is the most difficult thing to do in the world. It's only when you strip away all these identities, you take a person and you strip all these layers of selfhood and individuality and you reduce them to an object, to a thing, when you completely depersonalize them, when they have nothing left to live for in the place in which they've known all their lives, that's when somebody can choose to leave. But it's more specifically, the problem is also more complex, because in this book, she can't get passports for her kids because her husband is an enemy, has been declared an enemy of the state. He's been detained and disappeared into silence. How are you supposed to leave when somebody you love dearly, the father of your children, has been disappeared into silence? That silence is a power. You cannot negotiate with it. You don't know if that person is alive or dead, so you are trapped in place. You cannot leave. But then there's also the complexities of having a father who needs care. She says, you know, what if dad falls and breaks a hip? And so the questions about when to leave, how to leave, are fascinating to me, because we all have this sort of leap we take when we watch the documentaries. We watch films about the Holocaust or any kind of civilizational collapse, war, destruction, and we always say, but I would have known, I would have got out in time. And this book says, really, do you think it's that simple? Do you think you have free will? Because we are completely enmeshed in the complexity of our own lives. And to free yourself from that is one of the most impossible things to do. And so it's always the case that the intellectuals or the writers, the artists get out, because they're often less tied, they're able to work in other places, even the problem of getting work. And so the novel explores this paradox of you want to leave, but you can't. It's a fascinating thing for me.
Knjigu sad predstavljate u Hrvatskoj i mislim da mi možemo itekako razumjeti pitanja o kojima vi govorite, zato što su mnogi od nas ne tako davno u ratu koji je bio u našoj zemlji sebi postavljali ta pitanja: otići ili ostati, kako otići, kako ostati. Vaša junakinja kaže, jedina sloboda koju još imam je sloboda da se bori. Međutim, koliko pojedinac u takvim situacijama kada zlo zavlada uopće ima šanse u takvoj borbi, ili je samo moljac uhvaćen u lampi, kao što opisuje jedna slika u vašem romanu?
I think of this problem as like being in a labyrinth. I say that Eilish is a thoroughly modern character, representative of all of us in many ways, but she's also, I think, ancient. I think she's Greek. I think she has the problem that many Greek characters have in that they're faced with a kind of blindness, a human blindness. How do we read the world? And so I see her in the labyrinth. She's trying to make choices, enormous choices. She's trying to make choices for her children, to make choices for her, because she wants to hold that intact which we hold dear, which is civilization, which is love, which is the things that keep civilization together. But the world outside is pulling all that apart. So she's fighting, she's making choices, but she's inside the labyrinth. How do you know which way to turn? This is part of the problem of blindness. And so we always choose with certainty, but we reap the unforeseen. And that's how life is, and that's how it is for Eilish in this book. She makes one choice after another, but the complexity always returns something back to her that's far beyond what she had imagined. And that's how I think life is. I think that when we live our lives as ordinary people, even just in peacetime, in the serenity of our daily lives, we still move through darkness. All we have is but a match, the flame of a match. And I think of life as though we move through a dark passage, and we don't know the winds, if they're going to blow out this flame, and we just have a small piece of light. Just a small piece of light with which to see, and we walk forward, and we don't know. And that's a very powerful feeling, I think, to convey to people in fiction. And so I write in the present tense in this novel, where you get that feeling that you're on the edge of an unfolding, but you can't see, you can't know. And so you're alienated from reality. It's there, it's all around us, but we are always alienated from it because we don't know. And I think that for me, the project of fiction is about that. It's trying to articulate again the darkness of life.
Doista kad čitamo roman toliko nas uvuče da cijelo vrijeme se pitamo je li ovo stvarnost ili fikcija. Jako je teško razlučiti je li ovo neki izmaštani ili je realni svijet. Baš nas držite cijelo vrijeme u takvom osjećaju. Eilish, vaša junakinja, u jednom trenutku spoznaje što je kraj svijeta. Je li kraj svijeta nešto konačno ili je kraj svijeta nešto što se ponavlja, što je lokalno, što je osobno?
As a kid, growing up in a distinctly Catholic country, which Ireland is now very much a post-Catholic country, but we all grew up with the biblical myth of sudden cataclysm. The end of the world comes as a sudden event. And we often keep that in our mind, that there's this enormous thing waiting for us. But Eilish Stack in this book learns that actually the story of biblical collapse is just a story. It's a myth, because collapse, cataclysm, apocalypse is with us always. It's always happening. It's an eternal recurrence. In the book, she says, after she has lost almost everything, after the world she has known has collapsed, after she is in a place that might be described as the ninth circle of hell, she comes to understand that this idea of cataclysm is a story that it's actually the everyday, that it comes to your city and it comes to your town and it knocks on your door, and it's the end of the world for you, for your family, your community, your people. But the rest of us watch it on the news. And so the end of the world is actually a local event. And it's happening again and again. And I've, since I finished writing this novel, I've watched the end of the world come to Mariupol. I watched it come to Ukraine. I've watched it come to Gaza, like all of us. If you're living in that situation, if that piece of ordnance falls on your house, that's what the end of the world is. And so we often disassociate ourselves when we watch the news. Perhaps we have to, because how can you take on so much suffering as an individual? But we also create distance, and we say to ourselves, that's just war. That's something that maybe they brought upon themselves. No, it's not war. That's what the end of the world looks like.
Kad spominjete promjene koje se u našim društvima događaju, veliki napredak tehnologije. S jedne strane, s druge strane ekstremizme kojima smo svjedoci, pa onda i podjele i polarizacije koje nastaju u našim društvima. Što mislite, kuda nas sve to skupa vodi? Vodi li nas to prema nekom scenariju iz vaše knjige?
It's very difficult to answer, but I think if you think about it logically, it's not taking us to the center again. It's taking us to collapse. It's taking us to an unraveling of some kinds. I think the psyche of our civilization is sick. I think there's something very profound happening. Goya once warned that the sleep of reason begets monsters. A really great line. And from that, we know that reason is fundamental to building a modern world, building civilization. Otherwise, the monsters from the deep come up and devour us again. But the problem I think that's happening now is that reason has assumed its own superiority. And so in assuming its superiority, it has gone to sleep against irrationality, and the irrational is erupting everywhere around us. We're living within a mass eruption of the irrational. I think there's different reasons for this. It's my own opinion that we may have a limit to how much reason we are able to handle as human beings. We're only a couple 100,000 years old in terms of evolution, and we are not wired for the complexity of the world that we're in. I mean, we find ourselves now within this amazing structure that we've created, a techno-capitalist, liberal democracies defining 21st century life in the West. But to be in that structure asks a lot of a human being. And I'm not in any way advocating for some sort of point of view that towards some kind of libertarianism thing. I'm just merely pointing out that we are overloaded rationally by what we have to deal with. And people are struggling with it. Then came COVID, and COVID imposed again, but from a societal level, more structure, more rules, and a certain cohort of the population just went, I can't do this anymore, I'm out. And you see the rational being replaced by the irrational. And there's a lovely example of this. On the news in Ireland recently, there was a story about how we had seatbelt compliance in cars for years at 99%. And last year it had dropped to 96%. And I was thinking about this. They were looking for different reasons why this might be so. I got into a car on a book tour in the United States. It was in Portland. And the car started pinging. Ping, ping, ping. And the driver was not wearing a seatbelt. And the driver continued not to wear a seatbelt. And we drove into this. We drove in from the train station to the city, driving for 15 minutes. And I'm sitting in the back listening to this, pinging, wondering, is he going to put on a seatbelt? And then I understood that he was making a rational choice to be irrational. He was choosing to put himself at risk, choosing to put himself through the windscreen of the car if the car crashed, but he was choosing not to plug in that seatbelt. The thing about not wearing your seatbelt is it's actually impossible to forget. We're automated anyway to do it. We all just do it automatically. And even if you forget, let's say you're busy, let's say you're distracted, the car is telling you, you've got to put it in. And it doesn't turn off, that sound doesn't go away. So for 4% or the 3% that are now non-compliant in Ireland, they're choosing not to do that. And I met somebody who told me that she didn't wear seatbelts. And I said, why not? And she said, because I want to feel free.
Znači li to onda da smo u potrazi za nekom novom slobodom, da to na taj način i izražavamo?
I think we're searching in some way for escape from the hyper-rational structure. And we're searching in ways now for meaning again. Because what's happened is we've replaced knowledge with data. Human knowledge, then the wisdom of how to be a human being in the world, we seem to have just replaced it with this vast amount of information and data. And where has that led us to? We are now alive as human beings at a time where we have at our fingertips the greatest amount of information and data that's ever been available to a civilization at any time. And we know nothing. We have never been more lost as human beings. And so people sense that this isn't enough. It's not anything. You can't replace meaning with information. And so the problem of meaning is coming back up. And out of that, you're seeing right now an eruption of religion again, an eruption of the spiritual, and it's going to, I think we're living in interesting times. I think you're going to see a massive resurgence of religion. I think it's inevitable, but it may not be how it was in the past. It may be in the postmodern style that everything is. It's going to be an a la carte menu of whatever you want for yourself. But I think I think people are trying to figure out again how to be human beings in the world. They're trying to locate themselves within. And, I would say, I think about this all the time, that spirituality is really just whatever you do with your own solitude. And so what you do with your solitude, the thing is, you got to have solitude. I think that's how you locate yourself again. You don't, for me, I'm not a religious person, but I am a meditator. Solitude is essential. I want to live with that inner wisdom. I want to live with the intuitive. I want to live with that inner voice. And also, I think that artists have to make space for this, because artists have been so obsessed with the political for the last 10, 15 years. And, as I look at it, when you operate like this, what you're saying is society can solve all our problems, because the political is always within the sphere of society. And so much of art has been obsessed with the idea that everything can be solved within society. But when Robinson Crusoe went to that desert island and he found himself in profound solitude, he entered into a negotiation or a conversation with the cosmos, with his God, and he began to account for his own meaning in that space. Every single one of us has a desert island within us. There is a space in the psyche that we have to locate and walk and figure out who we are on that island. And that is a problem that does not sit inside society. It's a problem that lies outside society. And so fiction used to deal with this. Fiction used to chase these very deep ideas. Not all problems are found within society. Many problems are outside of the problems of what we might call the spirit, or the problems of our deepest meaning are outside of this space. And so all of my fiction has been about this problem. And I think that art needs to get back to that space too.
Koliko to unutarnje u vama utječe na to o čemu pišete? Dolaze li vaše ideje više od nekog intelekta ili intuicije? Koliko ima podsvijesti u svemu tome?
Is it more intuitive or more rational? There's a line I'm going to steal from Ingmar Bergman, the great film director, which appeals to me greatly. He says that intuition is the spear you throw into the dark as an artist. Intellect is the army you send in afterwards. So for me, art begins entirely from intuition. It begins from what I call the door into the dark. I imagine that there's a door back here somewhere, and the door is open. When I'm receptive as a writer, that door is open. I can't see in. I look, I don't know what's going to come out, but things come out, because this aspect of mind is invisible to us. It belongs to the subconscious. But when you create the conditions in life for it, that door opens and things come through. And so for a book like Prophet Song, when I wrote the first page of that book, I had no conscious understanding of what I was setting out on. I had no premeditation about what kind of book it was. It was an entirely intuitive act. It was the spear thrown into the dark. But later you start to understand what you're dealing with, what you're handling. And you start to understand that you're telling a story, but underneath the story, under the sentences, are the ideas that you're chasing, and they're all under the line of the story. And so they're under the sentences. And so the intellect comes in then in terms of shaping the material and applying the technique of craft. And so there's always a dance between the rational and the irrational, between these aspects of the mind. This is how we have to live anyway as human beings. We have to allow some aspect of the irrational to counterbalance the rational. This is actually how we're wired. We're not fully rational beings.
Što mislite, kako će umjetna inteligencija utjecati na umjetnost? Hoće li zamijeniti pisce? Hoće li moći napisati Prorokovu pjesmu?
It's a fascinating question. I think that if you're a writer who's producing novels for commercial market, if your authorial voice isn't all that strong and you're working in genres, I'd be scared, because AI is going to be able to do that pretty soon, if it's already doing it to some degree. But it's different with what we call voice-driven novels. Fiction, for example, that comes from a deep authorial voice, where you pick up a novel by Beckett, or you pick up a novel by Virginia Woolf, and you know instantly that's a novel by Virginia Woolf. It couldn't be a novel by anybody else, because coming out of that text is the feeling of a voice. What's in a voice? What makes up a voice? The feeling of aliveness, the feeling of someone inhabiting those words in a unique way. That can only come from having lived a life. It can only come from having felt deeply, from having suffered, from trying to take your pain and trying to articulate it into language. Now, can AI do that now? No, it cannot. I'm suspicious if it ever will be able to do that, because it's something that it's not coming from a rational place. It's coming from something that's quite magical within us. And we recognize it and we know it when we meet it as human beings, and we're going to always require that. But when we move towards what they're calling super AI, or that high level AI that's coming in 3 decades, if we get to that point, then everything's off the table at that point. I don't know.
Do tad ćete na svu sreću vi pisati knjige. Dobili ste nagradu Booker, kao što sam spomenula. Koliko je ta nagrada promijenila odnos svijeta prema vama? Je li možda promijenila vas? Je li vam uteg za novo pisanje?
Well, it's changed the world's relationship to me in that I'm sitting in a chair talking to you now, and that would not have been the case beforehand. The Booker is, it's the golden ticket for a novelist. Almost all of us exist in a space where it's hard to get book sales, especially if you're writing serious fiction. If you're writing fiction that's not looking to console the reader, that's writing fiction that's really all about the questions, then that fiction struggles to find a place in the marketplace. It struggles to get readers, and maybe you win prizes. I've won my fair share of prizes before, and I've been nominated for many, many awards, but it doesn't equate to security. It doesn't equate to a breakthrough, but the Booker does. The Booker just picks you up like this and puts you on the world stage instantly. And so I've gone from being a writer who, I had my core readership of a few thousand in different countries, and now I'm in 42 languages, and that's an extraordinary privilege for me. It's an extraordinary thing to happen, and the interesting thing is that there's also something comes to you, which is a responsibility, because you are the Booker Prize winner and you have to take that book and you have to go off around the world and talk about that book, which I've been doing. So I've lost 2 years of my life to the Booker. I've lost 2 years of not writing. And so there's been days where that still quiet voice that I'm talking about, that the oracle within, when he's been whispering, who are you now? Because this is not who you're meant to be. When I chose to become a writer, I didn't even choose it. I needed to be a writer. I was left with no other choice. But for me, that was about being in that space to navigate something, to decipher something, to ask questions through language. And that for me is the most perfect place to be, because I disappear when I'm in that place. The ego that I think I am does not exist. Time falls away, and I want to be that person. It's like a higher plane of thought. I need to be that. And so when I've been promoting the book around the world, that part of me has been largely missing. And so I'm now back to work, which is great. I'm back at my desk most of the time, and that's where I need to be.
Znači, pišete novu knjigu?
I'm writing a new book.
I nećete nam ništa otkriti o njoj?
No.
Morat ćemo se strpiti i pričekati, apsolutno. Gospodine Lynch, ja se nadam da će slika tog totalitarnog svijeta ostati unutar korica Prorokove pjesme i sigurna sam da će hrvatski čitatelji uživati u tom romanu. Najljepša vam hvala što ste bili naš gost.
Thank you. All my pleasure.
Hvala i vama, dragi gledatelji, uz poziv da i za tjedan dana budete uz Razgovor s razlogom. Doviđenja.
Izloči na čušću i pošli